The Bills make me wanna shout. Kick your heels up and shout. Throw your hands up and shout. Throw your head back and shout. Come on now, the Bills are making it happen now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a few months since I did the first episode of Challenge the Play, where I debated John from New York City on whether or not Joe Namath belonged in the Hall of Fame. Chris, one of the fellow co-hosts for Pigskin Glory, came up with a topic he wanted to do, and that is which Buffalo Bills team was better. Is it the 1990 team or the 1991 team? And for non-Bills fans, you may be saying, well, what's the point? They both went to the Super Bowl and lost. But for us Bills fan, it is a huge topic of debate of whether the first team that went was better or the second team. The first team, Chris will lay out his arguments for. The second team, 91, I'll respond. I'm going to turn it over to Chris, since this was his idea. He can start the debate.
All right. Now, while both teams were 13-3, I think that there were some slight differences in favor of the 1990 team. Number one, the point differential. The Bills had a 165 differential versus a plus 140 point differential. Jim Kelly, even though he didn't throw as many touchdowns in 1990 as he did in 91, he led the NFL in passer rating, despite missing 2.5 games. In fact, he led the league during a 6-year stretch from 89 to 94, which he was the only NFL passing leader not named Joe Montana or Steve Young. Thurman Thomas, while he didn't have as many all-purpose yards, and I know he did win the MVP a lot in 1991, I think he was very similarly good, except for maybe a couple of receiving yards. And you could argue he had arguably a better signature moment in 1990 when he had the 30 carries for 154 yards in the winner-take-all game against a better Miami team. On defense, they had Bruce Smith healthy. He didn't miss a game all year. He won Defensive Player of the Year. If you remember in 1991, he only played one game until December. They allowed 30 points only twice all year, and one of those was in the playoffs. As opposed to 4 times in 91, they allowed 55 fewer points. And here's a simple stat. When you look at the splits of yards and points allowed, in 1990, they were top 10 in yards and points allowed. In 1991, they were closer to not the top. And the other big argument for now is I think the AFC was a little tougher in 1990. I think with the Dolphins, the Raiders, the Chiefs, and a competitive AFC Central, I think the AFC was a little tougher in 1990 because remember, the Bills had to battle Miami all year in 1990.
Okay, so I hear your points on the 1990 Bills and why you think they're the better team. Let me go ahead and bring up some statistics for the 1991 Buffalo Bills. But off the top of my head, before I even do that, I have a few points. One is the Bills in 1991 faced more adversity. First of all, you mentioned Bruce Smith, how he was healthy all of 1990. But he wasn't in 1991. In fact, he missed most of the season. But the Bills' defense still rallied around the fact that they had a job to do, and they got the job done. Second of all, you mentioned Thurman Thomas, and that's a big reason why the 1991 Buffalo Bills, in my opinion, were better than the 1990 Buffalo Bills because we had the league MVP. Thurman Thomas had a season among seasons. I mean, let's see. Thomas rushed for 1,407 yards, 62 passes for 620 yards, leading the league in all-purpose yards once again. He scored 12 touchdowns to earn both the NFL's Offensive Player of the Year and the Most Valuable Player of the Year. Jim Kelly completed 64.1% of his passes for 3,844 yards and a league-leading 33 touchdowns with only 17 interceptions. That's almost a 2-to-1 touchdown-interception rating, giving him a passer rating of 97.6. And then we want to talk about one of the unsung changes, the differences between 1990 and 1991, and that's the fullback, and why our fullback in 91, Carwell Gardner, was better than Jamie Mueller in 1990. Now, don't get me wrong, Jamie Mueller was a good, solid fullback, but Gardner could block, he could catch, and as evidenced in 93, he could play special teams. Remember when he tackled that Dallas Cowboy return man with his legs? Obviously, that was 93, not 91. But Carwell Gardner is another reason why I think the 1991 Buffalo Bills are better than the 1990 Buffalo Bills.
All right, so now let me piggyback on some other things. I look at the state of the AFC in 1990 because you had a better Miami team in 1990. The Raiders were better in 1990. I think the Chiefs were a little better in 1990. Now maybe Houston wasn't as good in 1990, but I think the AFC Central was just a little tougher. And also a couple of interesting ones. Monday night, I think beating the Jets, and you want to talk about signature performances. James Lofton at the 200-yard game in 91 against the Bengals, but against a better Jets team on the road. Thurman had one of his signature games, the 200-yard game on the road against the Jets. And even if you can compare losses, the loss at Houston in November 1990 was not as I think the loss at Houston was a little better than the loss at Kansas City. And also you look at the interconference, I think the NFC East in 1990 was a little different than the NFC Central. Even the last place Cardinals in 90, I don't think were as bad as the Green Bay Tampa Bay pairing. And don't forget in 90 they had to, survive, the Philly game and the iconic Randall Cunningham touchdown pass. They had to play the Giants. And hell, even if you want to compare the meaningless Week 17, I think the 90 Redskins, 91 Lions, if you want to make a case for each of those, and go ahead. And also in the playoffs, I think the 1990 Dolphins were better than the 1991 Chiefs. And I think the 1990 Raiders were better than the 1991 Broncos. And when you look at the AFC West team, signature moments like as great as Carlton Bailey's interception was, how can you argue against 3 touchdowns in 77 seconds, a game which pretty much swung both teams because that sent the Bills up rocketing upward, and Denver spiraled into their worst season of the Elway era. And I know they had the impressive comeback against the 91 Raiders, but in 1990 the Raiders were were a 4-0 team, and they had the comeback with the block punt. So I think they had a better Raider comeback against a better team. I think the Denver was more of a signature moment. The NFC Interconference, I think, just a little bit into their favor. It's not a major nitpicking, but if I'm going to make a few arguments, I also look at the caliber of competition and a couple of key moments when you look at the state of the rest of the AFC. And in 1990, they held up much better in interconference play, whereas in 90, the interconference play was split. 91, outside of Buffalo, the rest of the AFC didn't quite hold up as well versus the NFC, save for the Bills.
All right, you mentioned a couple things I want to talk about. First of all, you talked about the playoffs, and again, I go back to the adversity that Buffalo had to deal with when you compare the 2 championship games against the Los Angeles Raiders. Buffalo just absolutely, to use the term from nowadays, dog walked them. It was 41-3 at half. It was 51-3 at final. Gerald Talley had a defensive touchdown. Jim Kelly fumbled the football, picked it up, and still threw a touchdown because apparently the Raiders didn't leave Los Angeles and tried to play a game coast to coast. Whereas the Denver Broncos were much more of a threat coming in. John Elway, much better quarterback than Jay Schrader at that point in his career. And the Broncos played lights out on defense. And you mentioned the Carlton Bailey moment. If it wasn't for the Carlton Bailey moment, we might not have won that game. And Carlton Bailey was an unsung hero in that. Now, the other thing, and this is, you never want to celebrate injuries, but the Buffalo Bills defense, we talked about the adversity they faced without Bruce Smith. In the playoffs, they knocked both their opposing quarterbacks for the Chiefs and the Broncos out of the game. Whereas against the Dolphins and the Raiders in 1990, they were in a complete shootout with the Dolphins, 44-34 in the snow. Their defense, I love the 1990 Buffalo Bills team, but the 1990 Bills defense just wasn't as good as the 1991 Bills defense. Now, what else? You mentioned about our interconference opponents, the NFC East in 1990 versus the NFC Central in 1991. Granted, the Buccaneers and the Packers weren't that good. Detroit was a meaningless game, so really you can only bring up the Bears game in which Jim Kelly just absolutely went off, throwing 4 or 5 touchdowns. James Lofton had that awesome touchdown where he got to backpedal about 20 yards. The Phoenix Cardinals hurt the 1990 interconference games because they just weren't that good. It's because of the 5th place schedule. We didn't play the Dallas Cowboys in 1990, but it probably would have been a better matchup for that. Same thing, though, with the 91. We didn't get to play the Vikings because they had such a poor 1990 season. The other games, you mentioned the losses. Yes, the Kansas City loss was absolutely horrible. But we got a chance for revenge on them in the playoffs. And again, same as what they did the Raiders in the 90 playoffs, we absolutely dog-walked them. We clapped their cheeks, if you will. The Bills dominated that game to move on, and then they dug down deep to find a way to beat the Chiefs. Now, the one thing I will give you on is the Super Bowl performance. Thurman Thomas had an MVP Super Bowl performance in 1990, Super Bowl 25 against the Giants, but because the kick went wide right, he didn't get the MVP. And in Super Bowl 21, through no fault of his own, it was more the Harry Connick Jr. pregame national anthem team misplacing Thurman Thomas's helmet. Thomas had an absolutely horrible game against the Redskins in Super Bowl 26. One last thing. You talked about the two Raiders comebacks. I will grant you that the Raiders comeback on Sunday Night Football in 1990 was amazing. It's fantastic. James Williams touchdown, an iconic moment. But the adversity, again, I bring up the adversity in 1991 where Scott Norwood just absolutely lost his mind, missing everything he could possibly think of to miss, and then coming back and in overtime, kicking the field goal to send us on with a win. Now, what I want to bring up, the divisional race. In 1990, the Bills' divisional race against Miami came closer down to the wire. In 91, we were further away, and the victory against the Jets, the James Lofton, 2 slant passes, 1 deep pass, and then 1 catching it in the end zone for the touchdown to put the game away against the Jets to win back-to-back AFC East Championships is a great game. Although the victory against the Dolphins in 1990 that helped win the division is still up there, but I'm just reminded that we won the 91 division easier. The schedule in 1991 lays out a little better, in my opinion, because we had the marquee game to start week 1 against Miami. Thurman Thomas is dive and catch. I mean, what more can I say about a way to open up a game? And forcing Mark Higgs to fumble, and Mark Kelso recovering that fumble really set it up. The Dolphins games, we swept the Dolphins in 91. We didn't in 1990. And yeah, we lost to the Patriots. But that was a game in which every division leader, in week 13, 91, where every division leader in the NFL lost. So I think that's more of just a fluke than anything else. So you had the loss to the Chiefs, the loss to the Patriots, and the meaningless loss to the Lions, in which had Thurman Thomas played, he might have also led the league in rushing, but Marv Levy chose to sit him.
Now, you talk about adversity with the 1910. I will not deny it, but I have to mention that the Bills had a very impressive stretch and of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention 3 touchdowns, 77 seconds against Denver, the block punt against the Raiders, and don't forget, against the Jets, who I don't think were as bad in 1990 as people make them out to be. Remember, they had the another late rally, the late touchdown by Jamie Mueller with a few seconds left. There's also that, and then they start to get on the roll, and that's when they started getting on the big-time roll, and of course, the big Philly game, the Giants game, the gut check game. But I think the big case is, remember, they had to beat not only the Giants, but the Dolphins without Jim Kelly, a very, very good Miami team at home who had already beaten them earlier that year with the backup quarterback. And going into that game, Miami could have essentially wrapped up the division going into Week 16, because if you remember, Miami was playing the Colts and the Bills are going to Washington. So you could make an argument that Week 16 game without Jim Kelly might have been the biggest regular season game in Buffalo Bills history to that point.
It very well could have been, maybe minus the 1980 victory over the Dolphins, which ended that horrible streak of the 70s. But I go back to, you mentioned the adversity that the 90 Bills had with losing Jim Kelly. So I would counter, and this kind of counters my own argument about the adversity on defense. But in 1991, Jim Kelly had, of the 4-run Super Bowl stretch, the only season in which he played every game. In 1991, he didn't miss a game. He missed, remember, he had the injury in 92, ended up missing part of the playoffs. He actually might have played all of them in 93. I'm not sure.
No, Frank Reich did. Actually 93, Frank Reich had to start the game they won at Philadelphia. That started their win streak.
Okay, so he did. In 1991 was this one season that Jim Kelly was able to start and play every game. And I talk about Kelly's season. I mentioned his numbers earlier. One of the games that I really want to bring back up about that was the Pittsburgh Steelers game. 6 touchdown passes, 4 of them to Don Beebe. So not only were Andre Reed and James Lofton stepping up, but you had Don Beebe. You had the tight end situation. Both years were pretty much the same. Metzelar's role, all Butch Roll did was catch touchdowns. Pete Metzelar's really kind of broke out in 1990. We talk about Pro Bowlers. I want to mention the 1991
AFC Pro Bowl team.
Yeah, it was loaded with Buffalo Bills. I mean, let's see if I can find just so I don't miss any. Sorry, I'm not quite prepared.
I can get you up to date on the 1990 team. I will mention another case in the 91 Pro Bowl. Jim Kelly was actually the Pro Bowl MVP in the 1991 Pro Bowl from the 90 season, and they had 10 Pro Bowlers if the 90 team sent 10 players to the Pro Bowl.
Okay, so I don't have. It's weird that the Wikipedia article doesn't list their Pro Bowlers. You'd think they would. But I can talk about some of the records and stuff that were held from the 91. The Bills led the league in total yards rushing with 2,381. That was Kenneth Davis having a breakout year. In fact, one of his touchdowns against the Indianapolis Colts actually made NFL Films 100 greatest touchdowns of all time. The Bills led the AFC in points scored with 458. They led the AFC in yards gained, 6,252. Jim Kelly led in touchdown passes with 33. That was the NFL lead. He was the AFC leader in passer rating with 97.6. Jim Kelly set a Super Bowl record for most passes attempted at 58, and that's not actually a great stat to have because that usually comes in losing efforts. But Thurman Thomas, NFL MVP, UPI AFL AFC Player of the Year. He won the NEA NFL MVP, the PFWA NFL MVP, the NFL Offensive Player of the Year. He was a 1991 All-Pro selection. He led the league in combined yards from scrimmage, both the 90 and 91. He led the AFC in rushing with 1,407. And I would make the argument that the only reason he didn't lead the NFL in rushing is because Marv Levy did not play him against Detroit. And Thurman Thomas also led the NFL the AFC, in touchdowns.
I will definitely concede to you that point on Thurman Thomas, and I will and one point in your favor I will mention, and I will mention this in your favor, is that when Thurman won the MVP in 1991, I think he did it against a very, very stout field, because I think the caliber of candidates that Thurman went up against, I think makes it very impressive. Warren Moon, Emmitt Smith, Barry Sanders, Mark Rippon.
Yep. So I would come back and say that this debate can rage on between Bills fans. There are other, obviously, fans that will probably bring up 2020, 1965, 1964, because obviously those two Bills teams won AFL championships. 2023 where Josh Allen won. 2024 where Josh Allen won the MVP is another great season in Buffalo Bills history. 1980, we were third in the league.
They ended the Miami curse. They won the division, and 81 team did win a playoff game.
Very well could have been in 1980 had home field advantage we didn't because of tiebreakers. Every team finished an identical 11-5 record in the AFC.
Buffalo beat San Diego, which somehow they had to go to San Diego, even though they beat them head to head.
Yes. So I would say that regardless of where you fit as a Bills or non-Bills fan, it's a great argument to have. One thing that 1990 definitely has going for it is the roster is probably a little bit better known amongst players, amongst Gen X and younger millennial or older millennials because of Tecmo Super Bowl. That was the 1990 Buffalo Bills team that was playing the 1991 schedule on that video game. 1991 was one of the years that Dr. Z, Paul Zimmerman, I believe, predicted
Buffalo Paul Zimmerman
go to the Super Bowl. Of course, Chris Berman predicted they would go to the Super Bowl in just about every year from like 88 to 94 or so. So there was definitely a lot of hype around Buffalo. We opened our season at home in 1991, which, a late afternoon window NBC game against Miami. It was a great season as a fan, and it's I'll tell you why, in my closing argument, why it holds my heart more than 1990 or 2020 or any other season. Because in 1990, I started watching football a lot closer. I became a fan in '88, but in 1990, I started watching a lot closer, but not till the end of November, December. 1991, I watched the preseason, the regular season. I would watch the Colts play the Patriots. I mean, it didn't matter to me. In 1991, football overtook my life as a 12-year-old. That was all I consumed, and the Buffalo Bills gave me so many great memories that year. I mean, the Raider game, the opening game against the Dolphins, waking up because I didn't have cable, waking up and finding out they lost to Kansas City, and it felt like I had lost my best friend because not only did they lose, but they got blown out. So going into the playoff game in January, worried that we were going to get beat by the Chiefs just to absolutely blow them out. So 1991 is my favorite Buffalo Bills team. 1990 is a great team. 1990's Super Bowl XXV is one of the only twice in my life that I ever cried after a football game. Both were losses. One was the Bills missing that kick, and the other one was when my Saranac Lake JV team lost a state record 55 straight, or we had won 55 straight games, and then we lost game number 56, which also cost us the championship in 1994. So 1990 also special place in my heart, but 91 gets the edge.
All right. My other case for, and this will be my closing argument for 1990, is because there was a little bit of an AFC power gap, and we were wondering, because remember, they were coming off the bickering Bills season, and you was wondering, who's going to shift the power gap because, Cleveland was aging and Denver was coming off the Super Bowl. There was a lot of uncertainty, and you was wondering who's going to who's going to stand at attention in this wide open AFC once the Browns Broncos era ended. And, Cincinnati was up in the air. He was wondering who's going to take control. And the fact that Buffalo was able to take advantage at a critical time in the AFC when that Cleveland Denver era was about to end, and when the run and shoot was about to start, and Marty Schottenheimer was about to take charge, and Art Shell was about to take charge in an era when I think the AFC was a little better in the early 90s than some give it credit for. It was the Bills who stepped to the forefront when there was a real power vacuum, and you're wondering, all right, who's going to take advantage now that Denver is going to be off? And it happened to be the Buffalo Bills, because the uncertainty of 1989 made it not a guarantee. Because if you mentioned got Dr. Z, remember, he picked the Chiefs to represent Super Bowl 25, and ironically, they would have played Buffalo in 90 if Nick Lowry makes that kick against Miami.
Okay, so there you have it. We laid out our arguments why we think which Buffalo Bills team is better, 1990 or 1991. What are your thoughts? And maybe you come at it with another idea altogether. Maybe you like 2020 better. Maybe you like 1992 or 1964. Maybe you're just a fan of Buffalo football in general. You've been watching my series and want to pick 1950 and all Buffaloes since they didn't allow a single point. You can check out that series on the History of Buffalo Bills channel. But let us know in the comments whether you think Chris won this debate or if you think I won this debate. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
The Bills have scored. It is bedlam. It is pandemonium. It is fandemonium. It is fan